The morning fog rolled across Pine Valley as Mary stepped through the old gates of Hope's Rest, a religious community hidden in the quiet hills. Her heart beat faster as she saw an old woman in a plain brown dress come towards her. The woman, Mrs. Smith, put her finger to her lips before Mary could speak. "Welcome," she breathed softly. "Here at Hope's Rest, we only whisper. It keeps us closer to God." Mary held her small bag tight, thinking about why she really came here, to find her missing brother Tom. He hadn't called or written in 6 months, not since joining this strange place. The community looked like something from old times. No phones, no cars, just simple wooden houses with gardens. In the distance, kids played quietly, their whispered giggles making Mary feel uneasy. Mrs. Smith took her to meet Mr. White, the leader who everyone called Father John. He sat in a small office, his kind face and white hair making him look friendly, but his eyes were cold. "Why do you seek us?" he whispered. Mary told her practiced story. "I saw your his kind face and white hair making him look friendly, but his eyes were cold." "Why do you seek us?" he whispered. Mary told her practiced story. "I saw your website. I'm tired of the noisy world." Father John smiled. "Noise corrupts the soul," he whispered, pushing a black book toward her. "Tonight, you'll learn our ways." Walking to her room, Mary noticed hidden cameras everywhere, made to look like simple decorations. She heard whispers all around, prayers mixed with other sounds she couldn't understand. A child started crying somewhere, and Mary watched as a woman quickly took the little boy into a building marked Peace Room. The woman smiled, but her grip looked tight. That night, Mary unpacked her things, carefully checking that her secret camera button was hidden. Through the thin walls, she heard endless whispered prayers. A small bell rang, and people moved like shadows toward the big meeting hall. Mrs. Smith came to get her. "Remember," she warned softly, "those who speak loud disappear." Something in her voice made Mary shiver. As days passed, Mary noticed strange things. Some people had marks on their necks, hidden by high collars. The Peace Room had thick walls and small windows with bars. At night, she heard odd sounds from underground, not just whispers, but something else. Once, she saw Father John talking normally on a phone in his private room, breaking his own rules. The biggest mystery was the locked basement under the main hall. Every full moon, select members went down there, carrying strange bundles. They came up hours later looking tired but peaceful. Mary tried following them once, but Mrs. Smith caught her. "Curiosity is dangerous," she whispered, her friendly smile gone. "Ask too many questions, and you might find yourself in the quiet room." One night, Mary found a crumpled note under her pillow. "They're watching. They're always watching. The whispers hide screams. Tom tried to leave. Basement. Help." The handwriting looked like her brother's, but different, shaky and desperate. When she looked up from the note, she saw Father John standing in her doorway, his whisper somehow louder than any scream. "Having trouble sleeping, dear one? Perhaps you need some time in the Peace Room to settle your mind." The whispers around Mary grew louder, like a storm about to break. She had found more than she bargained for, but leaving wouldn't be easy. Everyone who tried to escape seemed to vanish into that mysterious basement. As she lay in bed that night, the whispers seemed to form words. "Save yourself. Save us all. But whatever you do, don't scream." Mary woke to strange chanting from beneath her floor. The whispers had changed. They were deeper now, rhythmic. Following the sound, she crept downstairs at midnight, staying close to the shadows. The main hall was empty, except for a single candle burning near the basement door. For the first time, it stood slightly open. Her heart pounding, Mary slipped inside and descended the steep steps. The chanting grew louder, still whispered, but with an urgency that made her skin crawl. At the bottom, she found a maze of tunnels. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. Following the sound, she came to a large circular room. Through a crack in the door, she saw Father John standing in the center of a circle of kneeling people. They swayed as they chanted, faces hidden behind white masks. In the middle lay a body. Mary's breath caught when she recognized Tom's favorite blue shirt. But he wasn't moving. The whispers feed them. Father John spoke normally now, his voice harsh in the silence. Each soul we send below makes them stronger. Soon they'll be ready to rise. The masked figures began to rock faster, their whispers building to a frenzy. Mary watched in horror as something dark and shapeless rose from the floor, hovering over Tom's body. Suddenly, Mrs. Smith's voice came from behind. "We tried to protect you from this truth." Mary spun around to find not just Mrs. Smith, but a dozen others blocking her escape. Their eyes were completely black, their smiles too wide. "The old ones need silence to grow strong," Mrs. Smith explained softly. "That's why we whisper. That's why the noisy ones must feed them." The basement erupted in chaos. Tom's body jerked upright, but his movements were wrong, puppet-like. The dark shape plunged into his chest as he screamed. Mary ran, crashing through the surprised crowd. Behind her, whispers turned to howls. She sprinted up the stairs, through the hall, past houses full of sleeping people who had no idea what lurked beneath them. The gates were so close now. But as Mary reached them, she heard Tom's voice, his real voice, calling her name. She turned to see him standing at his window, alive but trapped. Other faces appeared in other windows, dozens of them, silently pleading. The choice was impossible, escape alone or go back for them. Below ground, something ancient and hungry stirred, and the whispers rose like a tide. Mary crept back through the gates, her hands shaking. The dark shape she'd seen enter Tom wasn't the only one. More shadows drifted between buildings now, barely visible in the moonlight. She found an old gardening shed and hid inside, trying to think. A soft tap made her jump. Through the window, she saw Sally, a young girl who worked in the kitchen. "They don't know I followed you," Sally whispered. "I've been keeping track. 53 people are trapped downstairs, but more in the peace room. They're being prepared." Sally passed Mary a folded map through a crack in the boards. "The tunnels connect to old mining shafts. That's how they bring the dark ones in. But there's another way out." Footsteps approached. Sally vanished. Mary unfolded the map with trembling fingers, finding marks showing underground passages, guard posts, and something labeled the feeding chamber. But what caught her eye was a small note. "Full moon ritual tonight. All watchers must attend." Mary waited until the bell rang for evening prayer. As shadows streamed toward the main hall, she slipped into the peace room. The guards were gone, attending the ritual. Inside, she found 20 people in small cells. Their blank faces lit up when she opened the doors. "We have to be quick," she breathed, "and silent." Leading them through back alleys, Mary followed Sally's map toward an old well behind the kitchen. But halfway there, Mrs. Smith stepped out of the shadows. Her eyes were completely black now, her smile impossibly wide. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" she whispered. "The old ones see everything." Behind Mrs. Smith, dark shapes rose from the ground like smoke, but before they could strike, a shout rang out. the first loud sound Mary had heard in days. Tom stood at the basement entrance, his clothes dirty but his eyes clear. "Over here, you shadow-feeding freaks!" he yelled. The dark shapes whirled toward him, drawn by the noise. "Now!" Sally appeared with a dozen others, carrying bright flashlights. Light burst from all directions, tearing through the shadows. Mrs. Smith screamed as her body began to crumble. But more figures were emerging from the houses, their eyes black, their movements jerky. Chaos erupted around the compound. The flash of light scattered the shadow creatures, but the possessed residents kept coming. Tom grabbed Mary's arm and pulled her toward the well. "The tunnels go deep," he gasped. "That's where they keep their real bodies." Sally led the escaped prisoners while Mary and Tom defended with lights. Underground, the passages twisted like snakes. Water dripped from the ceiling, and strange markings covered the walls. They found more cells, each holding people who hadn't spoken in months. "They feed on sound," Tom explained as they ran. "But not just any sound. They need human voices. That's why Father John makes everyone whisper. Keeps us weak, keeps them strong." They reached a massive cavern. In its center stood stone coffins, each marked with the same symbols from the walls. Father John's voice echoed, "You found our little secret." He stepped from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood hundreds of shadow figures, more solid than before. "The old ones slept here for centuries until we woke them. They promised us power, knowledge, immortality." "They lied," Sally said. She stepped forward, holding an ancient book. "I found this in your office. They don't give power. They take it. Every whisper, every stolen voice makes them stronger. But real sound, especially joyful sound." Mary understood. She started to sing. Her voice cracked at first. It had been so long. But Tom joined in, then Sally, then everyone. The song grew stronger, echoing off the cavern walls. The shadow creatures shrieked, their forms dissolving. Father John lunged for Sally's throat, but his body was changing, turning to smoke. The stone coffins cracked, dark liquid pouring out. The whole cavern shook. The ground shook violently as Mary's group kept singing. The sound grew, bouncing off every wall until the whole cavern hummed. Cracks spread through the ceiling, and water began pouring in. The shadow creatures were melting away, but Father John had changed completely. His human form gone, replaced by a mass of writhing darkness. "You don't understand what you're destroying," his voice boomed, no longer a whisper. "We could have been gods." The dark mass shot forward, wrapping around Mary's throat, but as it touched her, she sang louder. The darkness sizzled and retreated. Tom grabbed a fallen flashlight and shone it directly at Father John's shadowy form. The beam passed through him, revealing hundreds of small objects inside: rings, watches, phones. "Everyone's missing belongings," Sally gasped. "He's been collecting them as anchors, keeping people bound here." The possessed residents who had followed them underground began to collapse as their shadow creatures fled. But the water was rising fast now, nearly knee-deep. "The old mining tunnels," Tom shouted over the noise. "They all lead to the river." They splashed through flooded passages, helping those too weak to run. Behind them, Father John's inhuman screams echoed, mixed with the sound of collapsing stone. Mary looked back once to see the cavern cave in, burying the stone coffins forever. They emerged on a riverbank just as dawn broke. The first sunlight in months touched their faces, and people began to cry, laugh, and shout with real voices. But Mary noticed something strange. The rising sun wasn't just lighting up the sky. Hope's Rest was burning, orange flames consuming every building. The fire spread in a perfect circle, as if guided by an invisible hand. Sunlight swept across the smoking ruins of Hope's Rest. The perfect circle of destruction left nothing but ash, as if erasing all traces of the horror. But Mary and the others couldn't leave, not yet. Many still had family members unaccounted for. They found Mrs. Smith's body near the gate, human again, clutching a leather journal. Its pages revealed a darker truth. Hope's Rest wasn't the first community. For centuries, the shadow creatures had moved from place to place, building compounds, gathering followers, feeding on whispered voices until they grew strong enough to take physical form. Deep in the ruins, they discovered Father John's private office had survived. Inside, files showed hundreds of similar compounds worldwide. Video recordings revealed how he found the first stone coffin during a mining expedition 20 years ago. The shadows had promised him eternal life, but the final video showed the terrible price. Pieces of his soul traded for power, until there was nothing human left. Tom found a hidden room filled with computers. He was monitoring everything, he said, playing security footage. Look, there are other compounds, all using the same whisper rules. The screen showed communities in mountains, deserts, and forests, all filled with people speaking in hushed tones. Sally discovered a locked cabinet containing small black stones, each humming faintly. "Seed stones," she read from an ancient text, "used to wake the sleeping ones." More terrifying was the shipping manifest. Dozens of stones had already been sent out across the country. As they watched, one screen showed another compound in Alaska starting their whisper protocol. Mary clutched Tom's arm. "It's happening again," she whispered, then caught herself and spoke firmly. "We have to stop it." They gathered the survivors, strengthened by their ordeal. The shadow creatures had taught them an important lesson. Silence may be golden, but some things must be spoken aloud. Some truths must be shouted. "We split up," Mary decided, looking at the faces around her. "Warning others, finding the seed stones, stopping these things before they can feed again." She held up Mrs. Smith's journal. "Now we know how to fight them, and this time, we won't be quiet about it." Behind them, the ruins of Hope's Rest smoldered. But as the group divided into teams, their voices rang out strong and clear. The shadow creatures had wanted to silence humanity. Instead, they had given their victims a powerful voice and a mission. The survivors split into 3 teams, each with a mission. Mary led her group to a mountain compound in Colorado, following coordinates from Father John's files. As they hiked up the winding path, they heard the familiar whispers carrying on the wind. But this compound was different. Instead of wooden buildings, they found modern structures with solar panels. Through binoculars, Mary spotted children wearing small devices on their necks. "Voice monitors," Tom said grimly. "They're evolving their methods." "Project Echo is nearly complete," she said, her voice distorting. "The whispers have been digitized. Soon, we can spread them through phones, television, the internet." Behind her, massive speakers rose from the ground, beginning to emit a low, pulsing whisper that made Mary's vision blur. Sally's team radioed from Alaska. They'd found worse. The shadow creatures weren't just feeding anymore. They were breeding. Each whispered voice created a new dark form, growing stronger, more intelligent. The compounds weren't just gatherings. They were hatcheries. Tom's group discovered the pattern. Each compound was built on ley lines, ancient paths of power. The shadow creatures were following these lines, creating a massive web of whispers that would cover the entire planet. In Colorado, Mary faced the woman in white as the speakers grew louder, but they had a new weapon now. Portable sound systems loaded with music, laughter, shouts of joy. As the recordings played, the shadow creatures began to twist in agony, but the compound leader smiled. "You think you've won," she hissed. "Look up." Above them, dark clouds were gathering, swirling into a vortex. The whispers had reached the sky itself. The dark clouds above the Colorado compound swirled into a massive funnel, the whispers becoming a deafening, windless storm. From the vortex, shadow creatures rained down in liquid form, seeping into the ground and rising as solid shapes. Mary's team retreated to higher ground with their sound equipment. Tom radioed from his location. "The same thing's happening everywhere. The sky is their new breeding ground," Sally's voice crackled through. "The ancient texts mention this. When whispers touch the clouds, the final silence begins." But Mary noticed something odd. Each time lightning flashed, the shadow creatures flinched. Light and sound together, she realized. That's the key. They positioned their speakers around the compound and waited for the next lightning strike. The woman in white laughed. "Your weapons are useless now. The silence will spread from above," and a thunderclap cut her off. At that exact moment, Mary's team blasted music through their speakers. The combination created a shockwave of light and sound. The effect was catastrophic for the shadow creatures. They began to crystallize, shattering like black glass. The vortex above wobbled, its whispers turning to screams. The woman in white's body jerked violently as her shadow creature tried to escape, but there was nowhere to go. As the shadow creatures fell, the voice monitors on the children's necks crumbled to dust, but the victory felt hollow. From the compound's computers, they learned the truth. This was just a test site. The real threat was somewhere else, something bigger. In the woman's office, they found coordinates for a place called the Origin, where the first shadow creature had awakened. And it wasn't in any compound. It was deep beneath New York City, in abandoned subway tunnels that haven't been used in a century. The team gathered in an abandoned subway station beneath Manhattan. The tunnels stretched endlessly, but they followed a familiar sound, whispers echoing through the darkness. The original shadow creature, they discovered, had been accidentally awakened during subway construction in 1912. Workers had found a sealed chamber with ancient markings, and after that, people started disappearing. Deep underground, they found a massive cavern filled with old subway cars. But these weren't ordinary trains. Each car was covered in symbols, arranged in a perfect circle. In the center stood a black obelisk, pulsing with dark energy. "The first seed stone," Sally whispered, checking the ancient text. "All the others came from this." Tom's equipment detected energy flowing from here to every compound worldwide. The shadow creatures weren't just spreading. They were all connected to this source. Mary stepped closer to the obelisk and felt a pull. Voices filled her head. Every whisper from every compound, all at once. Through this connection, she saw the truth. The shadow creatures weren't invaders. They were what was left of an ancient civilization that had tried to achieve immortality by turning themselves into living sound. The woman in white appeared, no longer possessed but transformed. "We are their descendants," she said in a voice like static. "They chose us to continue their work. Humanity is too loud, too chaotic. We will bring the final silence." But as Mary looked closer at the obelisk, she noticed something, a hairline crack, and inside, the faintest glimmer of light. The team surrounded the obelisk, setting up their equipment. Mary touched the crack, and suddenly, every whisper-fed shadow creature worldwide felt it. The obelisk wasn't just their source. It was their prison, built by the ancient civilization's last survivors to contain their transformed brethren. The woman in white lunged for Mary, her body now pure darkness. "You'll doom them all." But Tom was ready. Massive speakers blasted a frequency matching the obelisk's pulse. The crack widened, releasing a blinding light. Through their connection, Mary heard the truth, not in whispers, but in clear voices. The Ancient Ones hadn't sought immortality. They'd tried to harness sound itself as energy. Their experiment created the shadow creatures, but some resisted transformation. These survivors built the obelisk as both prison and warning. Sally found the deactivation sequence hidden in her texts. As they began, shadow creatures worldwide started dissolving. The woman in white melted into liquid darkness, flowing toward the obelisk. "You're killing them!" she screamed. "No," Mary replied, understanding at last. "We're freeing them." The obelisk shattered. Light flooded the cavern. Where shadow creatures had been, people awakened as if from a long dream. The whispers transformed into normal voices, not silenced, but healed. In the ruins they found a final message. Sound is life. Light is freedom. Together, they create truth. The Ancient Ones hadn't failed. They'd left humanity the tools to fight darkness, not through silence, but through the courage to speak up. Months later, Mary stood in sunlight, watching children play normally, voices ringing with laughter. The compounds were gone, but their story survived as a warning. Silence can hide evil, but voices raised together can shatter any darkness.